So I would like to welcome Dr. Robert Gordon from the American Public University. Also, I would like to welcome Dr. Candice Boyd from the American Public University. And finally, I would like to welcome Dr. Andrew Kolarik from the Massey University and the Center for Defense and Security Studies. Thank you very much.
I get to start. Hello. Well, I'm glad everyone can make it. I just wanted to speak a little bit about three of us just for a moment. I'm Dr. Robert Gordon. I'm Program Director for Reverse Logistics Management over American Public University. Andrew Kolarik is a professor over at Massey University in Defense Studies, and Dr. Candice White is a professor of Transportation and Logistics at American Public University. So what we're going to discuss is artificial intelligence and ethics, and to some degree policy. One of the questions that we have and the panel will kind of be going into is, does ethics follow policy, or does policy follow ethics? The question here with artificial intelligence is that we will take three different positions, looking from different aspects of artificial intelligence. In all cases, we are not quite there yet for the technology. However, given the way that things are changing in the world today, we could be there very soon. We see the same thing happening now, for example, with the proliferation of drones. We see drone technology is already exploding, and policymakers are trying to catch up to see what's going to happen with that technology. So we see that artificial intelligence is in that same area as well. Perhaps there are a number of high-profile individuals that have mentioned that artificial intelligence can be a problem or is a threat to our existence. However, we need to discuss to see what exactly entails artificial intelligence, because we have three different positions. And just to touch on the three, just to explain them in a nutshell, my position is the Turing test, which I don't know. Oh, thank you. There we go. I was going to say, where did that thing go? There is a test out there where if a computer program or simulation can simulate a human being, and more than 50% of the individuals can believe that that program is a human rather than a computer, then it is effectively passed the test. What's interesting about that is this is a test that's been around for over 50 years and no program has been successful yet. We will also be looking at expert systems. Think of expert systems, things like weather prediction. When you talk to Siri on your phone, expert system, database of knowledge. And then we will also be looking at what could be pertain in science fiction more of a true artificial intelligence, meaning a cognitive thinking machine. So, to kind of talk a little bit about my position to start, there is actually, I find it rather entertaining that there's this long bet. There's a bet that by 2029 that some computer or program will actually have passed the test. It's a $20,000 bet between two individuals, Kurzweil and Kapoor, both recognized individuals in the field of artificial intelligence and technology. And so we'll kind of see how far along it goes. I know there's been recently in the news some programs that supposedly passed the test, but when you really looked at it a little bit deeper, it was no more sophisticated than kind of a computer bot or program. So it still has a long ways to go. However, I feel that eventually we'll get there. Some of the opponents on talking about this as artificial intelligence says, does this really matter? Because there are so many other forms of potential artificial intelligence out there. Oops, and then I will pass it along now to Candice.
Okay.
Who will
I hope you all will forgive me. I'm 8 months pregnant, so I think I'm going to sit and talk, if that's okay with everyone, as long as the microphone will capture my voice. So as Dr. Gordon said, I also work at American Public University. But prior to that, I spent 20 years working for the federal government in an organization called NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Now, many people know NOAA when something bad happens, when there is a hurricane, when there's a tornado, when there's a snowstorm, an ice storm, any type of bad weather, people tend to understand that NOAA is the organization that helps predict when these events are going to occur. Well, my perspective is a little different. How do we figure out what's going to happen in the future? What form of artificial intelligence do we need to accurately predict what's going to happen tomorrow, next week, 3 months from now, or even 10, 20, 30 years from now? These are some of the things that we want to think about. So let me just ask you, for those of you who are in the room, can you tell me where you're from? If you're here in the United States or if you're from another area. Can you just tell me where you're from? Okay. Okay. So you spent time in Arkansas, okay? France and London. Okay, wonderful. Okay, Virginia? Korea, and sir? Okay, Philadelphia. I'm just going to take a wild guess and say that weather in some way, shape, or form has impacted your life on more than one occasion. Am I right? Does anyone want to share if there was a specific event that affected you? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Any other weather phenomena that has affected you? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. All right. Any other weather events that have affected you? Yeah. Wow. When she came on shore. Wow. So you experienced a hurricane firsthand. Okay. They put you in the treehouse. Okay. All right. Uh-huh. Oh, it was great. Okay. Okay. Not bad. So from your perspective at that point in your life, it was a good thing. Okay. Well, we have so many different weather phenomena that affect us on a daily basis. It can be, again, a weather event. Sometimes it's smog. Sometimes that can affect us. Visibility. I mean, it runs the gamut. So what we're going to talk about today, and this is just a graphic to kind of highlight it, is that at this point in time, we do not have all of the parameters to accurately predict weather. I mean, how many times have we looked at the weather and it's been off? The temperature has been off, or maybe they said it was going to rain and it was sunny. That's because there are certain aspects of the atmosphere that we are not yet able to capture or parameterize. So what I'll talk about later is a couple of scenarios that speak to this. And how does artificial intelligence factor in to our weather prediction? So with that, I'll pass it on to you.
Well, so this is my competition. I take a different view. The academics, the elites use definitions, establish standards, and they often forget popular culture and general populace understanding. Okay, now, I have a PhD, which in my case stands for permanent head damage. But essentially, my view is all of that is wrong. Before we go into artificial intelligence, we need to understand what that actually means, okay? And the popular culture is right out of science fiction, okay? Now, Turing was a brilliant man, but he set the bar too low. Even though we haven't met his test, I still think it's way too low. I believe that artificial intelligence is defined when an entity shows true learning and independent decision making. Okay, so all of this stuff you've seen in the news by some of these very smart, powerful people fearing artificial intelligence, well, if that's our definition, everybody should fear it. If you think about the ramifications of your computer going, no, I'm not going to let you do that today. Or how about the traffic light system? or, I just don't feel like doing that. When the computers have a mind of their own, which is what the concept of artificial intelligence is, anything and everything's possible. Our infrastructure, our dependence on technology and computerized systems is huge. All you have to do is turn off the power for a month and watch how quickly we devolve into a third world country. Okay? So I prefer to take this position. Now, there's good and there's bad. Okay? And there's examples throughout science fiction of good and bad. Skynet, Terminator, that sounds all very sensational, but that's the logical progression if this is the real definition. And so that's kind of where we're going to mix it up a little bit during this panel. I've known Robert for 35 years, went to high school with him, and he has an uncanny ability to provoke me to say the darndest things. Okay, so he's like the straight man, and then I stick my foot in my mouth. So, and hopefully, and Candace is kind of the same person in between, which is why we put her where she is. So that's going to be the interaction, and throughout this, we're going to go through a series of scenarios. Each of us will take our little segment, but don't look at this as we expound infinite wisdom and you just sit there. Interrupt us, ask us questions. We're going to be asking you questions. We actually want you to participate. Okay, so that's kind of the pace of what's to come. And on that, I think you're next.
Okay. So, as Andrew's already mentioned, if the bar is too low and we haven't even reached it yet, what happens when a machine passes that Turing test? What happens when we actually have something that could be conceived and spoken of as artificial intelligence? Once that happens, are we then going to grow it from there? Are we going to make it achieve more? Ethically, is this the right thing to do? Should we even be going there? Many experts have kind of questioned, should we be creating these hyper intelligences that are out there in the world? I feel that you can ask the question if they're going to do it or not, but it's going to happen. I feel that the technology is there, the information is there, and that slowly but surely we're going to be achieving more and more technology that will be able to do that. So the question I have here is, are we going to wait for policy, or are we going to use ethics? Are we going to wait for the law to come down and say, all right, artificial intelligence is property, or is it a person? Or are we going to do something before that point to have it defined prior to the event that occurs? Okay? It's kind of an incident we can call with artificial intelligence. We start out with a scenario, for example, a self-piloting car. Who's responsible if there's an accident for that self-piloting car? What happens then? What happens if you're on a very narrow road on a mountain highway, and the choice for the computer then is to drive off a cliff or to hit a school bus? What then? What's the ethical response? Yes, and right now we're in this area, a gray area where you can have a self-piloting car, but there must be a human driver that's responsible. But I think the day is going to come where the technology is sufficient where a human driver probably wouldn't be needed. You already see Uber actually investing in that technology for self-driving vehicles.
Well, my question here is going to have this about the word responsible. Are we saying responsible is a personal responsibility or not?
It's both. Both.
Okay, so
Yeah, because there's a question of ethics, and then there's a question of financial liability. Because it's a question of, well, what should it do? Meaning, if the programmer were making this scenario and programming it, what's the answer to that? And then the question there is, well, then what's the financial liability? Because someone's going to be held culpable for the incident, whatever it is. Oh.
See, now yeah, I had to. You know, let's say that Apple comes up with the driverless car. Well, all of us sign a license user agreement that says they're not culpable and liable for anything, and we take personal responsibility for the use of the product. Is that going to apply to a driverless car? So I'm sitting in the front seat doing nothing. It drives, it causes an accident, people die. Did I just cause that? Am I responsible for it? Okay. So our you know, that's the core issue here. Now advance the intelligence further, where we're all dependent on driverless cars, and you're not allowed to drive your car. Under what condition? You see where we're going with this?
So then, from your perspective, perhaps then you're saying maybe it's not even the driver, because the driverless vehicle at some point will reach the level of technology where no one's in the vehicle. So then does it then become the liability and culpability of the owner? And then what if that vehicle is hacked and stolen?
Wouldn't the responsibility of providing a hack-proof system in a driverless car be the manufacturer? Oh wait, we have that user license again. Okay. And isn't that the paradigm we're all working on with these computers? It's nobody's fault but the users, yet we're forcing dependence in large amounts. I mean, that's a real key issue. And I think that's something that, if you're going to look at artificial intelligence and all the wondrous things it's going to do, we have to bring it back to reality.
That was interesting, your comment about a hack-proof system, because I've yet to see one. And I wanted to move on to Candace.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a favor. I'm going to see if we can go back. Is this how you go back in terms of slides? I want to go back to that graphic that I showed everyone. Okay, so for this scenario, we're going to talk about hurricanes, and I know we have one person who has real life experience with an actual hurricane. What I wanted to show you is these two graphics and explain to you what they are. The left is what we call a spaghetti model. A spaghetti model is when you use artificial intelligence to predict the future. And so to a certain degree, you have different forecast models that use current information to help predict the future. And as I mentioned, there are some aspects or parameters of the atmosphere that we are yet unable to measure. So these forecast systems guesstimate, but they guesstimate in different ways. So your result is, if you're trying to figure out where the hurricane is going, this is actually Hurricane Joaquin that happened earlier this year. The number 3 is where it currently was Thursday at 7 a.m. And each line is a different forecast model stating where it's going to go. The right graphic shows the actual forecast track. So if you look at the left and you look at the right, which spaghetti model was correct? Yeah. Really? Yeah, that's a great word. Kind of like a hybrid. So if you kind of take an average of all of the different models, you kind of come up with the actual track. But it begs the question, we talked about this in our opening remarks with natural disasters. Who's responsible? If the government decides to go with, I'm trying to pick a color that everybody can see. Can you see the yellow one? The yellow one actually makes landfall in the Carolinas. Yeah, makes a loop, continues north up to DC, and then out to sea. So here's a scenario. What would happen if the federal government decides that that is the forecast track we're going to invest all of our money and resources to help the citizens on that particular track, and it doesn't happen. Who's responsible? Can you sue? Can you sue someone for having a wrong track? Should we rely on artificial intelligence to try and help us predict the future? Or should we just wait for the weather to happen and just try and mitigate it afterwards, being reactive instead of proactive? So these are a couple of things to think about. So now let's go to the scenario. And the scenario is where I'm going to need your help. There's no answer, but I would like to hear your thoughts on this. So I know everybody can read, but for the sake of the presentation, I am going to read this out loud. The National Hurricane Center issues an advisory for much of the East Coast. While there are several models to choose from, artificial intelligence is in agreement that the hurricane will make landfall within 72 hours. However, one model predicts the hurricane will make a last-minute right turn, remain at sea, and never make landfall. How do you use artificial intelligence to make an educated decision? What are your thoughts?
I'm going to deflect that question and say, blame the politicians.
Always. Okay, so other than the politicians, from an artificial intelligence perspective, how do you handle this?
Use Andrew's argument here.
The politicians?
No, blame the programmers. Whoever made the
okay.
program then,
Good point.
because didn't they make an incorrect forecast, and it's they're liable for whatever happens?
All right, not to defend the programmers, but what about all the data collection points? What about the original designers of the system and where they're getting all this data? Is that all quality assured? Is it functioning properly? Was it spread out over a large enough area to get good numbers? So the programmers just did what the designers told them to do. So who's now at fault?
Am I passing it back?
No.
Okay.
Oh, we do that. There's
Okay.
other scenarios.
Well, I would like to hear from you. Yes.
So, in this nature, it's
Mm-hmm.
and there's past precedent. We had data for many, many
Mm-hmm.
et cetera. So, I'm guessing that all of those factors are being
Mm-hmm.
So, if there's only one model that is on device, I mean, once again, this is, I guess, hard to tell.
Yeah.
There's plenty of models that say it's there's two models that say it's
Right. Mm-hmm.
then you have to run the models. How do you use artificial
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Again, there's no right or wrong answer, but it helps you parameterize how we use artificial intelligence on a daily basis. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's not right. But I think especially when it comes to weather, we've kind of we've become complacent in terms of it's going to be okay, you know, maybe 24 or 48 hours into the future. But I know many people who will tell me that after about 2 or 3 days into the future, they don't have any confidence in the weather forecast, not only for a particular area, but globally as well. And so again, these are just some things to think about. Does anybody else have any thoughts on how artificial intelligence factors into this scenario? I watched that. I don't know if everybody has. It's a mini series on Netflix. Netflix. Okay, and so if let me digress for a second. For the presentation, House of Cards is a mini series with Kevin Spacey, and there was a scenario where a hurricane was about to make landfall, and they had to figure out if they were going to take resources from a big project and allocate it to help the citizens in that area, or just wait it out and see what happens with the hurricane. So now, please go ahead. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Good point. Yeah. Mm. Excellent question. Mhm. Good question. Any other comments? Okay. All right. Wonderful. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Good point.
Along that line, and that's where we start diverging from the technology into policy. Okay, that's where we start establishing where the lines are, what we're going to accept and what we're not going to accept, regardless of what the little box says. Okay, that's when we start taking proper, constructive, realistic action. And I think that's something that you have to keep in the forefront of your mind when you're establishing policy for technology.
Well, I think my time is up, so I'm going to pass it on. Oh, okay, okay. So I think we kind of addressed some of these, but this is we talked about a hierarchy of pain. What about a hierarchy of decision making? So let's talk about some of these. So, do you trust artificial intelligence when it tells you to cross the street? So, when it's the hand and then it's the person walking, isn't that artificial intelligence? That some computer is saying at this particular time it's time for you to walk? If it's wrong, what happens? It can kill you. Exactly, exactly, in the extreme sense. What about telling you tomorrow's high temperature? How many people think they got the temperature right here in DC for today? I mean, it may not be what you wanted, but was the temperature accurate? When you woke up this morning, did they tell you it was going to be cold and put on a jacket? Or did they tell you shorts and Birkenstocks? Next one. What about, do you trust artificial intelligence to tell you 72 hours in advance when a hurricane is going to make landfall? That's what we just talked about. Some people yes, some people no. I believe it was Hurricane Katrina in 2005, and the forecast actually was pretty accurate. I mean, from my perspective, but there were a lot of people in that particular area that decided to stay, and then almost to the last minute, then decided to try and evacuate, and then they had issues trying to evacuate everyone. Next question. Do you trust artificial intelligence to tell you the location of the next earthquake? Something to think about. I think we had a earthquake here in the DC area 2011, and that was unheard of. Most earthquakes in the United States occur on the western half of the United States. So if someone were to tell me at that point in time, oh yeah, there's going to be an earthquake in a week in the DC area, how many people do you really think would have used emotional intelligence to help them make an educated decision? And the last one, do you trust artificial intelligence to tell you when to evacuate? So again, these are just some things to think about. Now I think it's time for you to talk. Okay. All right, time for pizza. So I'm going to pass it on.
All right. I'm going to stand up for this. Now, this next series of slides that I'm going to show you are conceptual. They are real. They are actually occurring as we speak, but it's to build a conceptual understanding of the technologies we're relying on and then applying it to artificial intelligence. So Domino's is testing pizza delivery. Show of hands, how many of you would not mind pizza delivery by drone? Okay. As long as it's on time. Okay. Okay. So maybe not in the middle of winter, but you know. Prescription drugs are being tested to be delivered by drone. Now, people who are old cannot get out of the house, cannot go down the street. This is wonderful. For drug dealers, this is wonderful. Okay, for everybody else, I'm not sure. So a simple show of hands, how many of you think this would be okay? Okay, so there's a distinction here between pizza and drugs. Okay, that's okay, and that's fair. That's fair. But as we get used to delivery of pizza, we're going to get used to the idea of encroaching on other deliveries. Okay, that moral latitude is going to start blurring because we've done this already with technology over the last 50 years. All right, so the next one, and this is real. A guy put a semi-automatic rifle on the end of a drone, okay? And, you know, this may be the next gun debate. Is this covered by the Second Amendment? Now, a simple show of hands, and I pretty well know the answer, how many of you think this is okay? Nobody, okay? And that's fine, you know, that just means, oh, okay. Sorry, you're still considering. Okay, fair enough. Now, you're touching on an important aspect for home use. Okay, now just think of, but we don't operate in a accept. We operate as once we accept it, now we start thinking, how can we apply it? That's the modality of technology. Okay, so, and you know, this is problematic in a lot of ways and very interesting in others. Okay, so the next one, how about drones? Sure. All of All of these at the moment, let's assume they are people controlled.
Okay. So they're
Human input, not correct. At the moment, assume these are humans. And there's a very good reason for that 2 slides from now. Okay? But I'm trying to create an awareness. So now we have drones, and drones are being used in East Africa. They keep talking about putting drones on the southern border with Mexico, maybe northern border, because those Canadians may invade us. Okay, if we watch South Park, you know, we may have to build a large wall, you know. But you know, again, I'm making light of it. But once we put it on one border, we're going to put it on the other, because that's how technology works. Once we figure out it works one way, we start thinking of other ways to put it. All right, so how many of you think that having manned drones surveilling borders is a pretty good idea? Show of hands. Okay, go ahead. Well, okay, so okay. Well, again, once we authorize a drone, then we have to authorize, should we arm it? I know. Okay.
So military technology is in place, and I haven't seen it, at least with stuff like that, I haven't seen it ever created into, I think there are instances assault rifles.
Well, just remember, when we're talking our national border, we have planes that have missiles patrolling our border. So if we're going, again, that's not an unreasonable leap of understanding. I'm not saying these are going to be in our neighborhood. Now that may occur on an unmanned or an unarmed fashion, but if you put it, say, on the southern border, for whatever reason, they may have them armed. I don't know. You're dealing with people who will push the boundary till we push back as a collective society. And I've watched this silliness over the years. So that's, again, this is strictly for awareness building. I'm not advocating this. Yeah, that wouldn't be good. Yeah, just take, yeah. But I'm just saying. So, here's now why I got to this point. Assume all those scenarios, now remove the human component. Now this is artificial intelligence, whether it be Robert's definition, whether it be Candace's definition, or mine. So, would you have a problem with pizza being delivered through artificial intelligence via a drone? Most likely not. What about drugs? Now, if it was a mixed bag of, of understanding, now it's all fully automated. Now it's, using logistical algorithms and heuristics and et cetera. Well, that might not be so bad, because now there's no human intervention. Now only authorized, and it's a large infrastructure to get it there. And okay, for self-protection, would you like a weapon mounted to a drone, fully automated? You are entering a restricted zone. I will shoot you in 5 seconds. Now this stuff shows up in popular culture. Well, if we can throw this stuff in the movies, there's somebody figuring out a way to actually sell it. Okay? And then the last would be border security. Would you like artificial intelligence deciding who's allowed to cross the border. Well, that looks like an illegal alien, and that looks like somebody trying to give water to the illegal alien. Get them both. That sort of nonsense. Who sets those parameters? And if it's my definition of artificial intelligence, will the machine take pity upon someone? And so that's why I built this, to change the thought space for reflection. And on that, I'm going to turn this over.
The question again, ethics preceding law or law preceding ethics? The question here is, now that we've looked at a number of different scenarios and different possibilities, should we be starting to think about the ethics of these scenarios and situations in such a way that we start to create laws in order to control, govern, and otherwise deal with them? A question that we had discussed was, given the level of technology and what we're doing right now, to achieve particularly Andrew's concept of artificial intelligence, it's going to require some kind of technology revolution. Expert systems and systems of that nature are very likely to be able to maybe perhaps fool a human in the future, but they would not really possess independent thought. And given what we have now, we seem to be building larger and larger big data expert systems. But that doesn't create a new thinking being. So given the current system is economically based, meaning Apple is building artificial intelligence, Google is building artificial intelligence for monetary gain, there's little incentive for those organizations to create something truly artificial and self-thinking. And then when that happens, or when it does, or if it does, what's going to happen with that new level of sentience that we decide that this is intelligence or not? Again, it becomes the question, is it property or is it a person? And if it's property, what does that mean for that intelligence? And if it's a person, what does that mean for that intelligence? And what does it mean for the future of the rights of that newly found intelligence that now has its own status in society? So with those final thoughts, I thought I'd open up general question and answer. Well, it's profit and it's big data driven. So they don't want to create a new sentience. They want to create better and better expert systems to help a human. They don't want to create a new entity or a new life, so to speak, because that conceptually at the moment that wouldn't be profitable. I think the second one's probably true. Because I don't think that, well, okay, it's possible that I could see where a government or possibly a educational institution just for pure research may come upon it. But I think an accident in technology, we seem to be good at making accidents turn into something really great in the future.
My personal opinion on and I wouldn't call it an evolution, I would call it a revolution. The current technology hasn't changed. What we've done is we've added greater depth and robustness to it. So voice systems originated as a small card that sat in a computer. Those then became software programs like Drag and Dictate, and then they created this larger database and ability to match to voice recognition, and now we have this very complex system of voice recognition. But the paradigm, the model that this is all based on hasn't evolved. It's simply become more complex and more heavily layered. And the same thing, I think, applies to artificial intelligence. I was programming in Lisp 35 years ago, and the same premise hasn't changed, but we've created more layered complexity to it. Until we change the model, until we, and corporations aren't going to be the ones that do that, except maybe military contractors. because you want to automate some of these defense systems and give it beyond heuristics so that it can actually adapt to scenarios and changes in the battle space. It might be some academic working out of his house that creates the next revolution in this kind of technology, and then integrates it into the existing platforms we're now using. And that's when you get Skynet. Okay, I mean, again, I'm not saying gloom and doom, it might be positive, but unless they also include the heuristics of judgment, morality, and all those other things you're going to see from all the science fiction writers, you could see how quickly what we currently depend on could be turned against us. So that's my understanding of where this is headed. And I hope that answered your question without diverging too much. Yeah. Well, as a security expert, it's my job to scare the hell out of you. And I consider mission accomplished.
Well, I have a you said that about morality how we function, morality and judgment, and I've seen a lot of the reason for believing in society is good morality and good judgment is because there's a good positive response to those that operate in the framework of morality and positive morality and positive tend to prevent things that are not positive. But something like a machine has all this omniscience and whatever gets in here in 10 years, now.
Right.
It actually has supremacy where it does not need to exert morality and whatever because it's operating in a technology which is outside of the society. It's arguably considered so how do we draw the distinction there when the right judgment, when the best judgment as a machine can define it based on the program that we use it, based on our actually says morality.
Great question, and I want to use an example because I find myself doing this frequently. We're already programming it with programs in artificial intelligence not having that morality. For example, I will ask Siri a question, Siri will give me the answer, I will say thank you, and Siri says nothing. There is no protocol to go back and say you're welcome or give some kind of acknowledgement of there was an exchange of information between two entities, and that's kind of like what I see as like a social norm and kind of a nicety. It's not a requirement in society, but it's considered good, good character, I guess would be a word. And we're already programming our systems not to have that human characteristic.
But on the other side, you ask Siri how to kill myself, it gives me suicide so
Well, that was a moral intervention, and that was a human decision, and I think we need more of that without, all the other politics that go with it. I would say, though, the vast majority of computer applications simply are to make things more efficient. Speed and access to data quickly and to calculate faster. Now, that seems to be the momentum of the entire computer industry. That's imprinted in our moral values in the development of these systems, and then when people push back, which is why it now sends you to the prevention hotline, we then intercede. So part of the discussion here is, shouldn't we be interceding now? Okay, because if we don't start thinking about these things now, as this stuff we're so dependent. I mean, all of you have smartphones. I don't. I'm paranoid, I guess. Okay, I actually taught a smart device security course, post-grad, and I showed them my primitive Nokia phone that has like the snake game on it. And they all laughed at me and said, how do you exist? How do you interact with anyone? And at the last class, I showed them the phone, and not a single person laughed. They were all like, okay, you made your point. All right? Because you have no idea how insecure these things are. My point is, now's the time to be proactive. Now's the time to have the dialogue. Now's the time to think about how we're going to, regardless of the definition of AI, how it should be governed. Because it's going to affect us one way or another. And the only thing we can do is blame the corporation or the politicians instead of blaming ourselves for letting it get this far. So that's my response.
I'm good. That was fun.
Oh, okay.
I'm good.
I have a last question. No one can deny that these technologies grow so fast. The first thing is privacy.
Okay. Now, where it comes to technology, there is no such thing as privacy. It doesn't exist. It should exist. It's one of those shoulda, coulda, wouldas. It's something that I think needs top priority because as all these systems are interacting with you, they're also recording through an audit trail everything you're doing. After 10 years of accumulating your life, they can create a profile so exact as to who you are, what you think, how you want to interact, that you will not be able to say, but that's not me. Even if you've changed over that 10-year period, you can't argue against the profile. You can't argue against the big data. And that's the real problem. So all of this artificial intelligence that's making our life easy, like Siri, is going to make our lives a lot more difficult later.
And with that, I'll turn it over to you for final remarks.
Thank you very much. It was very productive questions. I would like to, I just have like question. For example, Snowden is a hero for Bill, considering all the information that he provided and all the consequences that these technology is promoting causing to the society. I would like to thank you on behalf of the Policy Defense Organization for participation and for comments about topic. And I would like to thank you also for the participation.
Thank you. All right. Oh, yeah.
I'll give you my business card. Let's have a dialogue. I'll turn you on to all kinds of stuff.
There we go. That's a great answer. All right. Yeah.
That's my